Look at me. What do you want to do? You and your bullshit. You got a bullshit answer for everybody. But I ask you a very simple question, and you can't give me a straight answer. Because you don't know.
Well, a lot has changed since I last did one of these videos, hasn't it? I went from a very small channel with a largely unwatched series on Good Will Hunting to the first episode having about 1.3 million views at the time of recording, and probably 1.2 million comments telling me the music's too loud and annoying. Somehow the series blew up, and I'm hugely grateful for the support you've shown. Despite the music, you've left a lot of great comments, all of which I think makes the comment section of these videos actually more insightful than the videos themselves, which is just wonderful. It takes what I guess is basically me giving like an informal lecture and turns it into an internet-wide discussion, so thank you. But anyway, I think we'll scrap the disclaimers. They were meant to point out all of this is just my interpretation. There's no one correct way to therapy, and also hopefully to make these videos sound a little more approachable to those of you who know nothing about counselling. But some people have suggested the disclaimers sounded arrogant, so never mind them. Let's just begin exactly where we left off all those months ago. Will had been hesitant about taking things further with Skylar. He'd had a session with Sean, who told the story of how he met his wife and gave up his ticket to the World Series for her. And I made the point Sean telling this story is a risky thing to do. Not necessarily a bad thing, but a risky thing. Giving advice or offering personal stories can be very beneficial at appropriate times, but it's just also possible the client may interpret messages from your advice different to the ones you were trying to communicate. There may be a disconnect, and if we're too caught up giving our own advice all the time, we might fail to notice something deeper going on in place of perhaps indulging our own experiences and the ego side of us that wants to feel like the all-knowing guru who gives brilliant advice all the time. So it's not a bad thing, but it's risky and always good to err on the side of caution with doing it for that exact reason. Anyway, the story does work. We know this because the scene immediately cuts to Will and Skylar together in bed, and by the way, I love this scene. The directing is perfect to really convey a more authentic feel of the love between the two characters than what films often do in this sort of moment, which is just have an ordinary sex scene. I mean, this is technically a sex scene, I guess, but what films often show here would be like from some clear angle where it's easy to see and is at a colder kind of distance. And it'll be very passionate, and you'll probably see like a PG friendly bit of sex before the scene ends. What we have here instead is very zoomed in, where we don't really see much beyond their heads, and a warm colour of red dominating the shot, and rather than physical passion, what we're actually shown is just chemistry between the two. Messing about with a magic 8-ball and joking about Skylar being tall.
Not that tall.
I just think it's a better way to show love between characters, really. A close shot that shows their closeness and draws us in with it, and intimacy with each other alongside this chemistry. These feelings evoke more of an emotional response from the audience rather than just placing them in some sort of voyeur's position to watch them have sex. But more so, it establishes the fact they've been seeing each other a few times by now, and that Skylar's wondering
why do we always stay here
at her uni flat rather than going anywhere else. I'll get to the actual therapy scene soon, don't worry, but on one level we know exactly why they always stay here. Will doesn't want Skylar to see Will's real life, and it's fine her seeing the super smart side of him and some of the tough, brash side, but he doesn't want her to see what his house is like, to realise he's an orphan, or just the general way he lives with his mates, who she has briefly met, let's remember, just not properly and not in their environment. There's a fear the privileged, sophisticated uni student might get a glimpse of tough, struggling South Boston and be scared off of Will. That's fairly clear, I think. But I suppose I'm saying all this because it's worth pointing out the slight push and pull dynamic of their relationship, or push and hold is probably more accurate. Will wants to do the same thing every night, which is hang around her uni flat and have sex, where Skylar wants to go out, see South Boston and his friends, and just do things. She pushes herself hard with her studies, where for Will that sort of thing's a walk in the park, but she pushes herself and she'll soon want to go on to California. Will, however, wants to work the same janitor job or construction job every day and just hang around bars with his mates. Adventure in battle with safety, let's say. Change versus resistance to change. I've taken the time to point this out because I think it's sort of a theme over this next section of the film. The idea of being pushed. When is it a good thing, and when does it take things a bit too far for someone? And I also think it is worth discussing these scenes a little bit on our way towards the next therapy session rather than just jumping straight into it, because Skylar does push Will here so that they do get to see his friends, and she does it well. She pushes him in a very playful way.
What if I said I would not sleep with you again until you let me meet your friend?
So the next scene is them in the bar. They all get on well. Things go as perfectly as they possibly could go when you introduce your girlfriend to your mates.
Give us a kiss!
Oh my god!
Even if Will then weasels out of showing Skylar his home and has to drag Chucky into the lie about having brothers. We also see a scene where Skylar's doing homework again, like in the last video, only this time Will's patient and accepting enough to let her learn the work for herself rather than doing it for her, which I just think is a nice touch to show that they're much closer now. And this is just about where things are at their absolute best in this film, other than the ending. This is the peak, and it comes right before the fall where they break up, which could be fitting. It might not be, but Will is someone fearing abandonment and expecting things to always go wrong, and so the experience of seeing something go right and well could be something to feel suspicious about rather than to delight in the pleasure of, if that makes sense. Things going really well should be a positive sign. However, the human brain can be a very strange thing, and it can lead us down a path of deciding if things are going well, that must mean they have to go wrong soon. This is all going to fall apart. Possibly. That's one possibility. Anyway, this theme of pushing someone against giving them time and space. Here's this scene with Sean and Gerry meeting in Sean's local pub, which is nice because it comes directly after this bar scene with Will and his mates and shows the similarity between the two. But they have a conversation about Will, which any school counsellor may see like the conversation they sometimes have with the teachers of their clients, or people who counsel kids privately might have with the guardians from time to time, which is the conversation where the teacher or guardian or whoever goes, "You've got a rapport with this kid, so come on, wave your magic wands now and make them be the way I want them to be. You know, you're close to Will, he listens to you, so you tell him all the things he doesn't listen to when I say them."
Have you talked to him at all about his future?
Gerry wants to push Will out into the world and get him a prestigious job. The thing is, part of the reason Sean does have a close connection with Will, and part of the reason Will does listen to him, is because Sean doesn't tell him how to be. If he started lecturing Will to get a job, Will would probably stop listening. And I know he has lectured Will a bit about taking a shot with Skylar and things, sure, and that's part of why it is risky to do that, but Sean lectured only about things he knew Will wanted, on a subject Will engaged Sean about, specifically asking for the advice. That's part of the difference. The other part is Sean takes things at a speed Will is comfortable with. There's a difference between pushing someone out of their comfort zone and throwing them out into the deep end.
It's great that they're offers, but I don't really think he's ready for that.
As a side note, it's also interesting how Gerry goes about making his argument that Will needs to be pushed. He drags the bartender Tim over and asks him if he's heard of Jonas Salk, which he has, and Albert Einstein, but then asks if he's heard of Gerry himself.
How about Gerald Lambo? Ever heard of him? Oh, thank you, Tim.
Which is an odd way to make his point, isn't it? Gerry demonstrating that he isn't at all famous and that unless Will works his absolute hardest, he will never be famous either. For one, it raises the obvious question, does Will even want to be famous? But Gerry is using the example of himself here, which tells us he's thinking about himself, his own desire for fame and greatness, and imagining that's what Will would want too, and that getting Will to achieve that would, I suppose, in a very big way, be about Gerry living vicariously through Will's success. He says,
This isn't about me, Sean.
but it kind of sounds like it is. It's also interesting that out of their argument over Will, we get,
It still took me over 20 years to do something worthy of a Fields Medal.
Well, maybe he doesn't want what you want. There's more to life than a fucking Fields Medal.
and Gerry then out of nowhere brings in the idea,
This is too important, Sean. And it's above personal rivalry.
which again is interesting because no one has mentioned any personal rivalry at all during this conversation or earlier conversations between them in the film. The fact it's on Gerry's mind probably tells us personal rivalry is part of it for him. But anyway, it's just interesting, I suppose, that this push and hold dynamic, that's not the right term to be calling it by, but we see it playing out with variations in Will's own life, and then that same dynamic here now being spread onto the parental figures trying to look out for him. Fitting as well, Gerry doesn't care what Sean thinks anyway, and despite having this conversation, he's already set up meetings for Will, which we see Will clearly isn't ready for because he sends Chucky to the job interview in his place as a big, rebellious, taunting middle finger to Gerry.
You're suspect.
But anyway, following that meeting in the bar, Will breaks up with Skylar because she asks him to come to California with her, which is a big commitment he's afraid of, and she confronts the fact he's afraid, which makes him very defensive and causes him to lash out and abandon her. Not to say she caused it and it's her fault, just, brevity. That happens. He then also sort of burns his bridges with Gerry a bit and then turns down a meeting with the NSA through a great, wonderful monologue that copyright definitely won't let me get away with quoting in big chunks.
Maybe I break it, and I'm real happy with myself because I did my job well. But maybe that code was the location of some rebel army in North Africa or the Middle East, and once they have that location, they bomb the village where the rebels are hiding. 1,500 people that I never met, never had no problem with, get killed.
He goes on. He shouldn't work for the NSA because breaking codes or whatever else might feel good, only his work may then have political consequences with a negative impact on the world. And the thing is, logically and practically, Will's probably correct. However, the rights and wrongs aren't so much the counsellor's focus as the emotion is, so rather than getting caught up in the political nuance or whatever else, or maybe just getting blown away by the fast-paced monologue and finding yourself at a loss of how to respond, Sean instead zeroes in on the emotion beneath it all.
You feel like you're alone, Will?
What?
Which isn't actually the obvious emotional message to draw from Will's monologue. I think the obvious message is that if I go out into the big world of work, it will make the world an infinitely worse place. Or maybe not so personal. Maybe it's just, I want to avoid this big world of work where things like the NSA exist because it's not safe. It's full of horrible events that affect the lives of innocent people. It's not safe. And again, Will is probably right on some level in what he says here. However, this isn't just about this one specific job. He'll apply the same kind of interpretation to all other fancy job offers he's been getting, or to taking things further with Skylar, or to leaving South Boston, or anything like that. He'll still probably find some clever reason to argue with the same fast-paced intelligence that it's not safe. So how does that relate to Sean asking if Will feels alone at all? I suppose the fact this isn't the obvious thing for Sean to say, maybe you could argue is ideal in this situation because Will has been running away with his bullshit, as they often refer to it in the film, getting caught up in all his intelligence in place of his feelings, and I suppose this slightly less obvious question of if Will feels alone would snap him out of the bullshit in a way that's not punitive or attacking or any of those things.
What?
I suppose you could argue that. Equally, we can assume they've had a long lot of sessions together by this point, because I doubt Sean could say anything half as direct as that earlier into the work, which is just an important thing to clarify about this video. If Sean had said that back before they built up a solid foundation of trust, Will would probably have felt attacked.
Do you have a soulmate?
Do I define that?
Somebody who challenges you.
And I think this explains how the question of feeling alone relates to the emotion of all these big jobs not feeling safe. Sean defines a soulmate as someone who challenges you. Someone who will accept you as you are, but will also push you at the same time. See how we're returning to the theme of being pushed already. And I guess if we followed this definition of a soulmate, Skylar is that, because she does love and care and accept Will as far as we see, but she's also been pushing him to meet her friends, to see South Boston, and for Will to commit, to come to California with her. She also wants to know more about his life, even if it will be hard to hear. Obviously she wants him to come with her because she loves him and wants to be with him, but she is also aware Will lives in his
safe little world where no one challenges you.
Even if it's not her intention, in just her being her, she's challenging Will to grow and to move beyond his comfort zone. Whereas, I suppose if they did just fall into a state of doing the same thing every day without any growth in their lives, maybe that wouldn't be a soulmate in Sean's definition. Maybe that would just be two people mutually sharing their anxiety of the wider world by creating their own bubble together. I think that's a bit of a harsh way to define it, but we can see Sean's point. Maybe love isn't just about acceptance, but also about wanting the other person to grow. Not because they don't like you the way you are, but because they want to see you grow the way we enjoy seeing flowers bloom or birds spread their wings. Maybe that side of it is as much love as the acceptance is. A world of just staying safe and avoiding anything more is a lonely world. That's Sean's point, and so someone who challenges him. Will thinks a bit and answers Chucky. So Will thinks again and answers Shakespeare, Nietzsche, and all the people whose books inspired him, but Sean points
I don't
out
have a lot of dialogue with them. You can't give back to them, Will. I'm talking about someone who opens up things for you, touches your soul.
part of this interaction, part of the idea of going on a symbolic journey with another person through love, discovering all their idiosyncrasies, letting them into our
Weird little worlds.
that's all part of the growth and change that doesn't feel safe to Will. What if he'll always keep them at arm's length from really touching his soul?
You'll never have that kind of relationship in a world where you're always afraid to take the first step, because all you see is every negative thing 10 miles down the road.
You gonna take the professor's side on
Don't
this?
give me a line of shit, no.
Look, I didn't want the job.
It's not about the job. I don't care if you work for the government.
So again, it's not about the job, it's not about the NSA. That's the example being used in this session because it's a very, very good example. But the emotion beneath it is still the fact Will doesn't feel safe entering that bigger world because all he sees are the negatives.
But you can do anything you want. You are bound by nothing. What are you passionate about? What do you want?
It's funny to notice it, really. Will can come up with a billion reasons not to do one job, or not to go to California, or not to leave Boston, or whatever else. Tons and tons of reasons not to do things, but very little line of thinking about the opposite. Very little focus on the reason for doing things. So when Will does give a big monologue about why not to take up a job with the NSA, that's fine. He doesn't have to work there. That's okay. But if that's what you don't want to do, let's talk about what you do want to do.
What do you want? I mean, the guys who work their entire life laying bricks so their kids have a chance at the opportunities you have here.
If I was Sean, I don't think I'd have said that. I think I'd have left a longer pause for Will to think and reflect on the point he's already made. Silence can be good. I've said this before. You give clients some space when they need it. I think adding this extra point detracts from the point he's already given and gives Will a means to avoid the question.
I didn't ask for this.
You know, it takes a very straightforward, albeit difficult question to answer of what do you want to do with your life, and attaches an unnecessary kind of pressure adding caveat of you've got an incredible gift, don't waste it. Which I don't think is what Sean's saying, but Will sees it that way. To Will, it could sound a bit like a nagging parent, or like something Gerry might tell him, and we find the conversation then leads down a more defensive route, with Will saying,
What's wrong with land brick?
Nothing.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's somebody's home I'm building.
which again is literally true. Will argues there is great honour in building homes, and he's 100% correct. There is. I've never liked the way a lot of society looks down on manual jobs. Many people do take a great sense of pride and fulfilment from them for many reasons. However, just because it's true in a literal sense, again, isn't the point. There may be honour and fulfilment in construction work, but it doesn't fulfil Will as an individual. We know that. If it did fulfil him, I doubt he'd have been making all sorts of arguments as to why he doesn't want to take up all these different jobs. He wouldn't have needed to shoot down the idea of the NSA, he'd have just said, I've already found what I want to do. This fulfills me. But so far we've seen Sean pushing Will quite a bit in this session, which, as I said, was definitely not appropriate earlier in the work, but you can push your client a bit more and make interpretations a bit more once you build up a relationship and you judge that it's a safe thing to do now. You test the waters from time to time, seeing what they're comfortable with, and, you know, we can assume all of that has been happening in the sessions leading up to this one. However, the point stands, Sean's pushing him a lot, and sometimes when you push too far, even if Will doesn't react or lash out like he would have done originally, he might not fully take the point in. Might be in a more defensive frame of mind where instead of really grasping what Sean's saying, he derails down a route of arguing how bricklaying is a noble profession. But nonetheless, Sean quickly brings things back with an interpretation.
You could be a janitor anywhere. Why did you work at the most prestigious technical college in the whole fucking world? Why did you sneak around at night and finish other people's formulas that only 1 or 2 people in the world could do and then lie about?
Which just brings things back into focus. As much as Will seeks the safety of his world, he also plays about with the edges of the world beyond, flirting with heading out there by working a job around these more prestigious people but without having to feel a part of them. Going to university bars and outsmarting people without having to feel like one of them. Taking the social divide of Boston and wrapping it up in his own ideas of his inner world with the loyalty and safety of his mates and of ordinary life set against this outer world of college professors and academics and esteemed psychologists he has to fight back against. Why should he need to, though? Why should he take such pleasure in outsmarting the academics or taunting the professors? If it is a world he has no interest in or attraction to, why doesn't he just ignore it altogether? As it is, he's flirting with this world beyond, and I guess in a sense including Skylar in that, but never really taking the leap. Which I guess maybe is another thing to say about Skylar's offer of California. Going there would probably mean becoming more like one of them, the academics, one of these people he spent his whole life set against, and identity-wise, that probably would be a pretty big deal.
So what do you really want to do?
I want to be a shepherd.
So did Sean's interpretation land? Will seems to think deeply for a second, but then comes back with something sarcastic. I don't know, it might have landed. He might think on it more in time, it might sit at the back of his brain for a while, or it might not. Sometimes I don't think you can always tell, and that's fine. Sean has a very strong relationship with Will at this point, and he dares to challenge him a little more with a more personal point than he would have done in the past. Because I think that is an idea I've never touched on before in all those sessions where Sean gave advice through examples of his own. I mentioned the possible disadvantages of it, but sometimes framing your point as about you or about people in general takes the sting out of framing it about the client specifically. So even though Sean has challenged Will a lot in the past, it's never quite so direct a challenge as this one feels, except during the bench scene, but that was sort of outside of the therapy work.
I want to move up to Nashua, get a nice little spread, get some sheep and tend to them.
Maybe you should go do that.
Sean knows Will enough now to tell when he's being sarcastic or mucking about. He knows this is Will's bullshit side talking again, and he doesn't take it seriously.
You're gonna jerk off, why don't you just do it at home with a moist towel?
You chucking me?
Yeah, get the fuck
Hey,
out.
no, time's not up yet.
This is another part of the film where we are falling much more into movie territory, because there's no way kicking out your client would be a good thing to do, as far as I see. We can understand the logic, of course. Will's not taking any of it seriously, he's not working or thinking in the sessions, he's just messing with Sean, and maybe responding to that with an ultimatum will help cut through all that bullshit. The bench scene did a similar thing after all, and that seemed to help Will, arguably. Will did go silent for several sessions in Rebellion after it, but it largely had a positive effect, so why not do a similar thing here? So to answer that, firstly, I think the question, why does Will have to take Sean's point seriously right now and not muck about? Why is that so important? I mean, he will take it seriously, really, because it's his life. All this messing about is a bit more of a surface level defence, so why is it important to cut right through that defence? Is that more Sean just getting fed up and impatient, maybe? Sean already made his interpretation, it was a solid point, and Will seems to think about it for a bit. He might think on it more when he comes away after the session. The idea might sit at the back of his mind and, I don't know, be something he reflects on while he goes to sleep. Does Will have to be ready to seriously answer the question now, though? You know, I just think defences can be frustrating, and it would be so much easier if you could just go forwards in a straight line with your client, but they have these defences and things meander a lot more because that's how people are, and arguably we know Will's not ready to honestly, directly, seriously answer the question of what he wants to do because he has no idea what he wants to do. So he does make a sarcastic joke to avoid admitting the scary truth that he has no idea. But the question has still been asked. That's good, it's there for him to think about now. Maybe he'll be able to answer another time, but to expect Will to answer it now just feels a bit much. However, that's all not really the issue so much as kicking Will out is the issue. It's the thing the first two counsellors did. It's the thing Will fears. It's the thing Will expects. The thing I praised Sean for not doing in their first session, yet here he is, kicking Will out, symbolically abandoning him just like anybody else. It's not quite so big an abandonment because Sean hasn't terminated the work. He still wants Will to come back next week, yes, but it breaks the trust they've built up. It goes against the whole idea of acceptance without judgment and having a space of belonging in the therapy room. It suggests none of that was real acceptance. Maybe it was all a lie and Will should never have dared trusting Sean. That's what it says. In reality, this would have quite a few negative effects on the work, if the work continued at all. I mean, it's entirely possible Will wouldn't come back next week after this, and in fact, he doesn't in the film. He's not there next week. Possibly not the week after either. The narrative doesn't make it entirely clear. But Will may never have intended to come back at all because he thought he could trust Sean. Sean betrayed him, so forget Sean. I'll go back to being on my own as I was before.
Listen, you're not gonna answer my questions. You're wasting my fucking time.
What?
I have better things to do with my time.
I thought we were friends.
So how much do you challenge people and how much do you give them space? It's a dilemma. Skylar challenged Will and it seemed to help. Sean has challenged Will countless times of varying degrees, all throughout their work, and it seemed to help. Equally though, we've had Sean telling Gerry not to push Will. We've seen when Skylar pushes Will too far, he turns cold, channels a level of abusiveness, and dumps her. Again, not to say it's Skylar's fault or she caused it. That would be a very simplistic way of looking at it, but we've seen that, and now we see Sean pushing Will too far, challenging too much. Will gets very defensive in retaliation.
Look at you, you fucking burnout. What winds your clock?
Working with you.
Where's your soulmate? You want to talk about soulmates? Where is she?
Dead.
That's right, she's fucking dead. She fucking dies, and you just cash in your chips and you walk away?
I really like that line, what winds your clock, working with you, because often it's true. I don't think clients often quite realise how much you come to not just care for them, but enjoy working with them. Even when it is hard and frustrating or whatever else at times, I don't think they often believe that, and sometimes I think some of the best, breakthroughs in sessions are in moments less about the client's own stuff than where they do realise that you genuinely and authentically care. Sean cuts through all the retaliation, however, by calmly saying,
Look at me. What do you want to do?
and Will goes silent because, as we already knew from earlier when he refused to answer the question by instead giving a sarcastic remark, he doesn't know what he wants to do. He can't answer the question. Will didn't need kicking out to realise he can't answer the question.
You got a bullshit answer for everybody. But I ask you a very simple question, and you can't give me a straight answer. Because you don't know.
So off Will goes. I just think how many people can give a straight answer to that anyway. It's not at all uncommon at any age, but especially around Will's age, to not have a clue what you want to do with your life, and for that question to be absolutely terrifying, because the more you don't know, the more you feel like your life is slipping away to indecision. Why has Will not knowing become a thing to effectively vilify him over? Surely it's much more appealing to take time carefully exploring. The film kind of paints this scene as a good moment, but realistically I don't think it would be. It's not just Sean has pushed Will too far, it's that he's done it in ways that aren't at all beneficial or really achieve anything anyway. But we've been talking about the dilemma between how much or little to challenge a person, so I'm going to end with a point about that. Will does stop going to counselling after this, which could likely happen. He skips his session, possibly sessions. He's broken up with Skylar, and by the way, we get this really great scene where Skylar's in the airport for her flight, and it's framed like it might be that typical rom-com cliche where the bloke turns up at the airport at the last moment to confess his love, and you see Skylar sort of half hoping Will might turn up, but he never does. Even though it would be right, even though he wants to, he never does. He's also kind of burned his bridges with Gerry. He's kind of right back to where he started this film, and we get a wonderfully simple scene between him and Chucky in a fittingly grey setting.
Look, you're my best friend, so don't take this the wrong way, but in 20 years, if you're still living here, coming over my house to watch the Patriots game, still working construction, I'll fucking kill you. You owe it to me. Because tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and I'll be 50, and I'll still be doing this shit. I mean, you're sitting on a winning lottery ticket. You're too much of a pussy to cash it in. It'd be an insult to us if you're still here in 20 years. Hanging around here is a fucking waste of your time.
Chucky is the only person in the world who could really get away with saying that so directly to Will. The only person who could say it and have that message taken in, because he's his best friend and their form of connection is a very honest, blunt one. It's a shock, but in a positive way. Chucky telling him all that is the reason Will then does dare go back to Sean again, the reason we then get the iconic "it's not your fault" scene. And I just wanted to point it out because it's a nice contradiction to most of what I've said. All these messages the film presents about not pushing Will too much and the dangers of it. Here's Chucky pushing Will more than anyone, and it working. Now, what that doesn't mean is best friends can push people and should be really blunt with each other all the time. No, don't draw that conclusion from what I'm saying. It doesn't mean best friends should threaten to kill each other when they go a bit wayward, necessarily. What it means is that this question of when or how much to challenge someone is a very, very complicated one, for which I can give no clear answer, no correct thing to do, no solid technique or anything at all, because it always depends on the person, the type of connection you have with them, and on the circumstances. Best friends or not, Will might not have been the sort of person in the right sort of mindset, or the moment being right, or Chucky having the right form of relationship to be able to say all that. Same with all these moments throughout all the therapy scenes. Sometimes it's not always what's the advice or message we need someone to hear, but also are they able to hear it? Are they in a position to hear that sort of message or not? And that's a big part of the work. Evaluating, reflecting, understanding your client more, tuning into the feelings, seeing what they take in, seeing what they don't, trying to find a good pace, knowing when to challenge and when not to, and how to go about all sorts of things. It's a massively complex dilemma, which means kind of keeping two opposed viewpoints in mind simultaneously. So, whilst there are good, clear approaches to follow in your work, there's never ever a clear guide on exactly how to be or how to respond to things, because it always does depend on the person and the circumstances and you, which means you're always having to evaluate everything. And all these things I've talked about in this series so far, keeping clear time boundaries, or not giving too much advice, or being too personal, they're not rules, they're useful guidelines to sometimes bend a little bit depending on the situation, but only providing you reflect and consider carefully if this really is the right situation to bend things a bit, or if you're just thinking it is for some other reason, if there's some other dynamic at play behind this. Really thinking it through. This was another longer video than the last few. It felt the right time for a longer one. After this we have one more session left, and it's the It's Not Your Fault scene, the one you all keep asking if I will make, so yes, I will make that video. I don't know when, you'll probably have to be a bit patient, I expect, but I will 100% make that video. And then either that will be the end of this series and I'll have to find a different series to start, or I might go back and do some extra bits, or a general wrap up, or something else just to finish and conclude this series. I'm not sure yet. Thank you for all your support with all of this. These Good Will Hunting videos were the reason this channel accidentally started. They're then also the reason it grew to 55,000 subscribers at the time of recording this. You've all been wonderful. Even when you criticise me, I appreciate it, and when you offer different interpretations or get discussions going in the comments. I love seeing that. I think it's genuinely amazing. But for now, like the video if you liked it, comment your thoughts, subscribe if you fancy more, support me on Patreon if you fancy even more, and otherwise, hopefully see you next time. As ever, a special thank you goes to David Kling, Darren Burdoglatter, Kestrel, Biden Book the Streak, Tommy Steenrod, Samara Salsi, Sharakov2814 and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.